on the line by Robert Halfon, who's the chairman of the Education Select Committee. Robert's a Tory MP who voted for the deal, and Alastair Campbell, former Chief of Communications for Tony Blair. Gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed for voting for me. Can I start off with you first, Robert? We're hearing rumours that the Prime Minister may try to bring back her deal for a fourth time next week. That is just going to infuriate parliamentarians, surely.
Well, no one knows what's going to happen. I don't think the deal will get voted through, sadly. I voted for it today because I wanted to bring Brexit over the line. I feel very sad that we haven't kept our promise to the British people that we would leave on the 29th of March. But I don't think it's going to get through unless there are changes to the backstop. Having said that, I'm working very hard with MPs from across the House, Labour MPs and other parties, on this proposal, Common Market 2.0, where we would join the European Free Trade Area. You'd be out of all the political union, out of the Court of Justice, out of the fisheries and the farming policies, but you'd safeguard jobs, businesses and our economy. And I think that actually that's one proposal will be considered on Monday that's got a good chance of being voted through.
The Prime Minister, I imagine, thinks that her deal will face a showdown with what the parliamentarians decide is their preferred option. But her deal, it got a bit closer this time, didn't it? But you saw people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, astonishing. He and Boris Johnson voting for the deal. Jacob Rees-Mogg had said that this deal represented slavery. And then he said, next time round, he said, well, of course, I'll only vote for the deal if the DUP vote for the deal or perhaps abstain. But it turned out he voted for slavery after all this afternoon because the DUP refused to budge. I heard a rumour that the Prime Minister went as far as to offer the DUP a bridge from Northern Ireland to Scotland if they would back our deal. I mean, this is so unsavoury. This kind of pork barrel politics never formed part of our political culture, Robert.
Well, I haven't heard that. All I know is that the DUP have said that the backstop is their main problem. Sadly, the majority of our colleagues supported it. It's because most of the Labour Party voted against the deal. Otherwise, we would have got it through. So, I actually blame Labour for stopping Brexit. We did have 30-odd colleagues on my party who voted against the Prime Minister's deal, but the Labour Party got to bear responsibility for this because they are the party that could have got this across the line. The Prime Minister had separated the political declaration from the withdrawal agreement. She tried to build bridges with Labour MPs in strong Leave areas, and yet still the Labour Party said no. And I really fear for what is going on. The demonstration today in Parliament, as I was leaving Parliament, people were screaming at me, traitor, traitor.
Appalling.
I think that we're in
appalling. I mean, Brexit has just opened up the sewers, and some very nasty people have crawled out. Alastair Campbell, you must have been relieved, I imagine, today when you saw the numbers, because we've been hearing all over the last 48 hours that there might be a number of Labour people crossing over to support the Prime Minister's deal. And as Robert said, she invested in several constituencies, didn't she, that she'd never shown any particular interest in before. And yet the total number of rebellions from the Labour side was very small.
It was 5, and I think that's very good. And I don't think the Labour Party should feel at all bad, nor should the SNP and anybody else who voted against it, because it's a very, very bad deal. It's a very, very bad outcome. And people talk a lot about how a second referendum would sort of undermine democracy. It's pretty undermining of democracy to have so many MPs voting for something that they're on the record as saying is a terrible, terrible thing for the future of the country. So in the end, people are, yes, the country's divided. Yes, Brexit is a very difficult issue. But in the end, parliamentarians do have to do what they think is right. And Robert's made the judgment that he made. I respect him for that, and he's explained why. But I think if you believe, as clearly you do, John, and there's clearly Labour MPs who voted today as well, that this is a really bad deal for the country, then I think you have to vote against it. And the tragedy in this is that at every stage that Theresa May has had the opportunity to try to try to bring people together. She did it in her speech today. I was watching her speech live. The first few minutes, I thought, oh, she's getting the tone right here. She's doing quite well. Then as soon as somebody started to challenge her, she goes into her peevish mode. She starts saying that she's the only one who's speaking to the national interest. And I suspect that she pushed people even further away.
Yeah, I thought that as well, watching her. I mean, Robert, you were in the House. I was sitting watching the Prime Minister's speech, and I thought she had the tone right. And I was surprised, to tell you the truth, because she's such an appalling performer. But I thought she had the tone right at the beginning. But as Alastair said, as soon as people started giving her points of information and challenging her, she went back into robotic and then angry mode and started shouting at them. And you could almost see the waverers on the Labour benches dropping off because they thought they're not going to vote for someone who is so angrily tribal.
Look, I voted against the deal the first time round, way back in January, because there was lots I thought was wrong. I've supported different versions of the primary steel coal market 2.0, as I just described to you. But well, the House of Commons is an illustrious place. I mean, people are not just going to change their vote just because the Prime Minister got, a bit fierce in the closing minutes of the debate. I mean, this was about the future of our country, about the stability of our country. And my constituents in Harlow are incredibly worried about what is going on, what is going to happen. We've got small businesses. Forget about the big ones who may be able to survive all this. I'm talking about small businesses who may have dealings with Europe are really worried as to what is going to happen. So I think it's a grim day, and I really worry that we are moving to a second referendum, because I think that you will unleash a wave of, not one Tommy Robinsons, a wave of Tommy Robinsons in our country. And the demonstrations today that you see will just be a little drop in the ocean compared to a tidal wave of anger and extremism that it will potentially unleash if people feel that their vote has been ignored and they've been disenfranchised.
Okay, let me put that to Alastair Campbell. Alastair, do you see this tidal wave of fury being unleashed across England if there's a people's vote? I mean, indeed, do you think the odds of a people's vote? I know it's something you want to see, but is it increasing? I noticed that Ian Lavery, who is the chair of the Labour Party, defied a 3-line whip to vote against a second referendum, despite the fact it's Labour Party policy. The chairman of the Labour Party voted against it, and he suffered no sanctions whatsoever from his party leader for so doing.
Well, do I think it's more likely? Yes. I thought from the word go that it's the likeliest option, because I think we're seeing the consequence of the fact that the Brexit that was promised by the lies of Johnson and others is undeliverable. The Brexit that's been negotiated is deeply unpopular right across the House of Parliament and right around the country. And ultimately, this is not an issue that I think can be resolved by a general election. And this idea that we don't end up trying to do the right thing by our democracy because we're worried about Tommy Robinson, for heaven's sake. I mean, yes, there's a tidal wave of anger. There was a tidal wave of anger when 1 million people took to the streets last week. But it doesn't have to be violent. And so I just think that politicians have got to have a little bit more faith in the people to understand that when circumstances change, when what Robert can possibly be democratic, given that so much has happened, given that the Brexit that is now on offer is so different, what earthly reason can there be for not going back to the public and saying, on the basis of what we now know, on the basis of how much more difficult this has proved to be, do you wish to proceed?
Alastair,
and I suspect the country would say, no, we do not.
Alastair, two opposition leaders, Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the opposition, and Ian Blackford, the leader of the SNP, the third group, they both stood up after today's vote in the Commons and called for the Prime Minister to go. They both said that they want to see a general election. I suspect, in reality, only one of those two men really want to see a general election, and that's Ian Blackford, because he knows he's going to pick up a lot of seats. Jeremy Corbyn cannot be confident, can he, of winning an election given the state of the polls, and his backbenchers know it.
Well, it was very interesting that when Jeremy Corbyn, and he actually didn't call for an election, he called for her to resign.
But he has called for an election.
true. But it was interesting that it was not exactly greeted by wild cheering on the Labour benches. And I was pleased that when Ian, your leader, did an interview with Sky News, and I was on Sky News at the same time, and I asked him what he thought a general election would solve in relation to Brexit. And to be fair to him, he said, look, he has been calling for a people's vote or a general election. And to be fair to you and him, you have been saying that for some time. So I don't believe that a general election will resolve this. I think that Brexit now is so all-encompassing that actually, and I actually believe it's anti-democratic now not to take this back to the people. And look, politics is a divisive business, but there are going to be passions. But please, Robert, let's not do something that we might think is the right thing to do because we're worried that a Tommy Robinson-type figure who would exploit whatever is going on in the political firmament to try to pursue his own vile agenda, let's not that be the reason for not doing something.
Robert, you guys on the Tory benches don't really want to see an early general election either, do you? Because you remember exactly how it went last time round. You went into the 2017 election way ahead in the polls. Remember all the stuff about Theresa May, strong and stable. She didn't want a coalition of chaos. Tories turning up on TV screens parroted those lines. She was a disastrous campaigner. A lot of decent Tory MPs lost their seats. You would not feel at all confident about Theresa May tramping the country. Apart from anything else, what would you put in your party manifesto?
Well, as the saying goes, turkeys don't vote for Christmas, and I think that no one wants an election. And actually, I don't know if I fear Tommy Robinson or Brenda from Bristol more, if there was one, but it would actually increase division in our country. I just want to make the point about the referendum. I was a Remain voter. I was a reluctant Remain voter. But I came to the view, having spoken to my constituents in Harlow on numerous occasions, that they expected the referendum result to be followed through. And we had the referendum, 17 million people voted for it. We had a general election when the two major parties said they were going to implement the referendum result. We've had two votes now on having a referendum in Parliament. They've both been rejected. One a couple of weeks ago, one this week when we had the indicative.
But everything's been rejected. I mean, everything's been rejected.
No, but the referendum vote
I know it was
rejected twice, because there was a vote.
Well, hold on. The Labour Party abstained on the first occasion, as you know, Robert. And
it was
and
still
also you've got the
it did not get a majority
against it. But if the government cut.
Sorry, guys, you're both talking over one another. So just, Robert, before we go, can I just ask you, of all the various lovely candidates that you have as potential leaders of the Conservative Party, who catches your eye at the moment?
Well,
who do you think's the winner?
I'll tell you, at the moment, I genuinely haven't made a choice because it's going to be a Ben-Hur movie, a cast of thousands. It looks like are going to stand, but I will.
Complete with the chariots and the blades and the blood.
Possibly, but I want someone who's going to unify Brexit and Remainers. I want somebody who is going to be counterintuitive, and I want someone who's going to make sure that the Conservatives are the social justice workers' party. So I want to wait to see what these people, these candidates, are going to say for themselves. But we've got a long way to go before I make a decision about who that's going to be.